Cleopatra is considered a beautiful, powerful woman and also has a list of the most famous lovers in history. Theories about Cleopatra's lover and her sexual proclivities abound. She was married to her brothers, bedded at least 2 powerful Roman men, and may have fashioned a vibrator using bees. The history of Cleopatra's sex life is both in keeping with the Egyptian sexual mores of her time and potentially tabooed by modern standards. Was she the beautiful temptress she was made out to be? Did she dominate the men in her life? Today we are untangling the real details of Cleopatra's epic and mythic sex life. You will be shocked at the end of this video. Cleopatra may have pleasured herself with bees. According to legend, Cleopatra fashioned a vibrating device for self-pleasure by putting angry bees into a hollowed-out ground. In other versions of the story, Cleopatra sat on top of a papyrus box of angry bees. If true, she's not the only Egyptian to bring animals into the bedroom. There were accounts of men engaging in intercourse with cattle, women doing the same with dogs, and Egyptians successfully figuring out how to do the deed with crocodiles. In fact, the animal's dung was a common contraceptive at that time. Cleopatra was supposedly skilled in a certain form of lovemaking. According to legend, Cleopatra slept with a total of 10,000 men during her lifetime. She has repeatedly exhausted 100 men in a single night. With her excellent lovemaking skills, she successfully seduced many powerful men in history. Cleopatra organized orgies that lasted for days. Cleopatra supposedly arranged weeks-long, sexually charged parties. With her lover, Mark Antony, they founded a group known as the Inimitable Livers, who lived the good life, and according to historians, engaged in endless debauchery and folly. They feasted, played games and partied on the outskirts of Alexandria, most likely a cult dedicated to the god Dionysus. They often staged lewd theatricals in which people danced nude while drinking to excess. Accounts differ widely on Cleopatra's beauty. Roman historians describe Cleopatra as the woman who was haughty and astonishingly proud in the matter of beauty and having the beauty of the damsel. But there are mixed accounts of how much of that beauty was real and how much were propaganda based on the coinage. With Cleopatra's profile on it, she had a large nose and chin. It's possible she wanted herself to be presented in a form that displayed power rather than beauty. Even if she wasn't the bombshell Hollywood would have us believe, she certainly had the charm, intellect, and cunning to use her sexuality effectively. If she was unattractive, it's quite likely that her contemporaries would have said as much. They didn't shy away from calling her a whore, so there's no reason they wouldn't have exaggerated her appearance for the worse as well. Roman poet and historians called Cleopatra a lot of horrible things. Because of her influence on Roman men and very public sexual habits, Cleopatra was constantly vilified by poets and historians. Poetry produced during the time of Octavian placed her in opposition to the emperor's sister Octavia, the slighted wife of Mark Antony. Cleopatra was mocked as a greedy, hedonistic Egyptian who benefited from a scandalous marriage. Those characterizations are relatively tame to compare to those made by Sextus Propertius, a 1st century BCE poet who painting her as a prostitute. Cassius Dio, a 2nd century Roman historian, called her a woman of insatiable sexuality and insatiable avarice. Her relationship with Julius Caesar was adulterous for both of them. When Cleopatra seduced Julius Caesar, she famously had herself smuggled in to see him by way of a bed sack, or rug of a bedroll, depending on the source. She said to have immediately captivated him. At the time, Cleopatra was married to her brother, Ptolemy XIII. She was only 21 years old at the time, but Caesar was well in his 50s and on his 3rd wife, Calpurnia. Their marriages didn't stop them from continuing their affair and producing a child Caesarion. Cleopatra even went to Rome to be with Caesar in 45 BCE, albeit with her second co-ruling brother Ptolemy XIV. She stayed in Rome until 1 month after Caesar's demise in 44 BCE, then returned to Egypt. When Octavian resisted Cleopatra's advances, she took her own life. There are different versions of Cleopatra's attempts to get Octavian into bed, but they all end with Octavian resisting her. In one telling, Cleopatra tried to lure Octavian into her sexual web. Shortly after Mark Antony's defeat at Actium and subsequent suicide as a prisoner, she gained an audience with Octavian. According to historian Cassius Dio, she accordingly prepared a splendid apartment and a costly couch, and moreover, arrayed herself with affected negligence. Indeed, her mourning garb wonderfully became her and seated herself upon the couch. Beside her she placed many images of his father of all kinds, and in her bosom she put all the letters that his father had sent her. She spoke in melting tones and sweet with the glances she cast at him and the words she murmured to him. Octavian was able to resist Cleopatra, but he wanted to take her back to Rome to parade her in triumph, so he didn't rebuke her directly. She tried to seduce Herod of Judea, and it almost got her killed. Cleopatra and Mark Antony parted ways for a time while the latter fought in Armenia. Cleopatra made her way to Judea, where Herod the Great, a client king of Rome, already resented her. Because Antony had given Cleopatra much of his land, this didn't stop her from having a criminal conversation with Herod. According to historian Josephus, perhaps she had in some measure a passion of love to him, or rather, what is most probable, she laid a treacherous snare for him by aiming to obtain such adulterous conversation from him. However, upon the whole, she seemed overcome with love to him. Herod was not sure how to respond to Cleopatra's advances and called together a council of friends to decide whether he should end her life for making such treasonous advances. The council talked him out of it, saying Antony would retaliate. Herod thought Antony would be better served if she were out of the picture, but he followed their advice and simply escorted Cleopatra to Egypt.